It's almost, you know what you're saying? Yes, I understand. What you're saying is, well, there's some people who got hurt with a knife, you know? They cut their fingers with knives, so let's stop making knives. Let's stop producing knives. Yes.
Keep making knives.
The Hollywood industry was at a crossroads in 1969. At the time, many of the A-list actors of the 40s and 50s like John Wayne, Doris Day, and Cary Grant had retired. Box office profits were dropping due to the rise of television. The days of the Hays Code were gone, and counterculture was on the rise. It was the summer of peace and love. That's why, on the night of August 8th, 1969, Abigail Folger smiled at Susan Atkins as she stood outside her bedroom at 10050 Cielo Drive. Abigail assumed she was a guest, but as Susan entered the bedroom, she pulled out her knife. In Joan Didion's 1979 essay, The White Album, she writes, "Many people I know in Los Angeles believe that the 60s ended abruptly on August 9th, 1969. Ended at the exact moment when word of the murders on Cielo Drive traveled like brush fire through the community. And in a sense, this is true. The tension broke that day. The paranoia was fulfilled." On August 9th, 1969, at 9 a.m., a maid called the police because she found 5 dead bodies at Cielo Drive. Actress and 8-month pregnant Sharon Tate was found dead in the living room with nylon rope around her neck and stab wounds in her belly. Celebrity hairstylist Jay Sebring was found with the same nylon rope around his neck and a towel covering his face. He had been shot. The bodies of Abigail Folger, a coffee heiress, and Polish writer Wojtek Frykowski were found on the lawn, both with multiple stab wounds. Frykowski had been shot and hit over the head repeatedly with a blunt object. A body later identified as Steve Parent was found dead in the driver's seat of a Rambler on the driveway. He had been shot. Tate's blood was used to write "pig" on her front door. The next night, August 10th, supermarket owner Leno LaBianca and his wife Rosemary were found brutally murdered at 3301 Waverly Drive in Los Feliz. In Leno's blood, "Rise" was written on the wall, and "War" was carved onto his abdomen with the carving fork still in his stomach. Also written in blood on the walls was "Death to Pigs" and the phrase "Helter Skelter" misspelled on the refrigerator in blood. It would take investigators approximately 4 months to connect the murders back to Charles Manson and his family. Charles Manson was born November 12, 1934 in Cincinnati, Ohio. His mother, Kathleen Maddox, was 16 at the time of his birth, and he never knew his biological father. Shortly after Kathleen's son was born, she married William Manson and called the baby Charles Manson after her new husband. His mother was neglectful and attempted to enter him into foster care. Instead, he was sent to a caretaking institution called the Guybolt School for Boys, the first of many schools. By 13, he began committing petty crimes like robbery, for which he was caught, and the courts placed him in another school, the Indiana School for Boys at Plainfield. While at Plainfield, his teachers recall that he didn't trust anyone and was only good to those he could gain something from. There, he endured sexual assault and other abuse, and attempted to escape numerous times. He was transferred to many other juvenile centers, where he started to commit violent assaults on other boys. This led to him being transferred to the Ohio Federal Reformatory in 1952. Caseworkers described him as antisocial yet striving for status among his peers. He learned how to manipulate his doctors and caseworkers, convincing them he was making progress, and then drastically proving otherwise. Eventually, on May 8, 1954, he was given parole and shortly after met Rosalie Jean Willis. They married and moved to Los Angeles, but he went back to jail for admitting he had stolen 6 cars and taken at least 2 across state lines, which is a federal violation. At the time he was arrested, Rosalie was expecting. Manson was then sentenced to 3 years in an LA prison. Rosalie later divorced him and took custody of the child. At some point in 1959, Manson then married a woman named Leona, and they had a child named Charles Luther Manson. It ended in April 1963. While Manson was still in and out of prison, he educated himself. He became literate, learned guitar, and taught himself how to read. He also carefully studied religion, specifically paying attention to how religions may be used as a tool of manipulation and control. In Jeff Ginn's book, Manson, The Life and Times of Charles Manson, it is revealed that he specifically paid attention to Scientology. It was also during his time in prison, approximately 1964, that his obsession with the Beatles began. On March 21st, 1967, Manson was released from prison even though he didn't want to be. "Oh no, I can't go outside there. I knew that I couldn't adjust to that world, not after all my life had been spent locked up and where my mind was free." After his release, he headed to San Francisco, where he began forming the Manson family. The family consisted of about 100 casual followers at its peak and about 30 core members. Most of the family members were middle-class white girls in their late teens and early 20s participating in the counterculture. Manson would use these girls to lure men into the group or use them to help support the group. In fact, it was several of these young women who met Beach Boys co-founder Dennis Wilson and then brought Manson to Wilson's home. The family bounced around LA, but finally settled at Spawn Ranch, where Manson had total control. He forbade members from carrying money and wearing sunglasses, and he would make members take LSD while he lectured them for hours about the future of humanity, conclusions he had drawn from the Book of Revelations and the Beatles' White Album. Manson's philosophy was largely based on a race war he believed was coming, called Helter Skelter, based off the Beatles' White Album. He believed this music was delivering messages directly to him and the family. Manson wanted to get the ball rolling himself, which is why at Hinman's murder his blood was used to write "Political Piggy" along with a Black Panther symbol. Manson recalled that Black Panther members had previously called cops pigs, so this phrase was meant to frame them. This also explained Tate's blood used to write pig on her front door, and the phrases "rise," "death to pigs," and a misspelled Helter Skelter written in blood at the LaBianca crime scene, along with "war" carved into Leno LaBianca's stomach. The Los Angeles Sheriff's Office raided the Spawn Ranch on August 16, 1969, shortly after the Tate LaBianca murders, but it was merely on the suspicion of car theft. After the Manson family was released from this raid, they relocated to the Barker Ranch in Death Valley. Then, in early October 1969, Manson and 22 other family members were raided at Barker Ranch and arrested again, this time for stealing RV equipment. Family member Susan Atkins was arrested during this raid. It was also during this raid that 2 girls approached the police saying they needed their help, that they were trying to leave the family. One of the girls asking for help was Kitty Lutzinger, who the police had been looking for because they knew she was the girlfriend of Bobby Beausoleil, the main suspect of the Gary Hinman murder, which had happened back in July 1969. Hinman was a musician and supposed friend of Manson's. In July 1969, Manson sent his followers to rob him. He was held hostage for 2 days, during which Manson cut Hinman's ear, and family member Bobby Beausoleil finally killed him. In blood, they wrote "Political Piggy" on the wall and drew the Black Panther symbol. At the time of the raid, Kitty was 5 months pregnant and had no idea Bobby was in jail with murder charges. On October 12, 1969, following the Barker Ranch raid and arrest, Kitty Lutzinger, told the police that Susan Atkins and Bobby Beausoleil had been sent on Manson's orders to Hinman's house for money. Kitty had heard back at the ranch that someone was killed, and Susan Atkins had told her about stabbing a man several times in the legs. On October 13th, Atkins was questioned by the Los Angeles Sheriff's Office when she told investigators that Bobby Beausoleil held Hinman hostage for 2 days and then stabbed him to death. On October 20th, the Sheriff's Office told the LAPD about Kitty Lutzinger relaying that Atkins had revealed she stabbed a man in the legs. They figured out that Susan Atkins was not referring to the Hinman case that the Sheriff's Office was investigating, but referring to the Tate murders that the LAPD were looking into, where Wojtek Frykowski had been stabbed in the legs. The LAPD and LA Sheriff's Office had finally seen the connection between the Tate and La Bianca murders, and their relation to the murder of Gary Hinman, with Manson behind the command of the killings. Meanwhile, Susan Atkins was in jail from the Barker Ranch raid, booked under the name Sadie Mae Glutz at the Sybil Brand Institute on the suspicion of murder. She bragged to several prison mates, including one by the name of Virginia Graham. Atkins was not shy and told Virginia that she was completely guilty of first-degree murder and had stabbed Hinman 4 or 5 times. She told Virginia about Manson and said that she'd follow his orders without question. On November 6, 1969, Susan Atkins told Virginia Graham that she was involved in the Tate murders. A warrant was issued for the arrest of those involved in the Tate LaBianca killings on December 1st. Charles Manson, Charles Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten. On March 29, 1971, Charles Manson, Leslie Van Houten, Patricia Krenwinkel, Charles Tex Watson, and Susan Atkins were prosecuted by LA County Deputy District Attorney Vincent Bugliosi and charged with multiple first-degree murder convictions. Originally, they were sentenced to death, but then California ruled the death penalty unconstitutional, and so they were given life in prison. The trial broke many records. It was the most expensive to date, costing nearly $1 million. It was the longest length of time a jury had been isolated from the public, and it was the longest murder case in American history to date. Manson has been a point of fascination for the media over the decades. Hundreds of books were published on the topic of Manson over the 70s and 80s, and he graced the cover of several magazines. There are also musicians who have covered Manson's songs, such as the Beach Boys and Guns N' Roses. And still, in 2014, at the age of 80, Manson managed to be engaged to a 26-year-old woman who visited him regularly. Fiction and non-fiction novels have been written about the Manson murders, as well as film and television adaptations, the latest blockbuster being Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. The victims of the Manson murders have their own unfortunate legacy, their names forever synonymous with a cult leader and his killers.